3, 2, 1, and launch. Different blue marks there, you can adjust them. Welcome to this review. This time I'm going to be talking to you about the Nova VORTEX and sharing with you my thoughts and feelings about the wing, having tested it for several days in a wide variety of conditions. The way these reviews work, for those who don't know, is that primarily our focus is to go out and test the gear to get to know it really well, especially wings and harnesses, but also other gear, rucksacks, helmets, instrument, everything. Our objective is to test the gear and get to know it really well so we can best advise our customers. We really do make a very, very big effort to test gear a lot, I think it's fair to say. I can't speak for anyone else, but we do many hundreds of hours of testing of gear to get to know it really, really well. Actually done quite a lot of ground handling now with the Nova VORTEX, and the VORTEX is no doubt about it. It's very closely related to the CODEX. So the CODEX is a kind of semi-light wing. It's actually not a heavy two-liner, it's their standard build, but it's actually the construction, it's semi-light, it's got nitinol rods as well, and overall it's actually relatively semi-light and compact wing already. But the VORTEX, they've made it even lighter, and they've done a whole load of little things all over the glider and everywhere, the risers, every detail that they've done. It is worth checking out and reading through the product information and the description about the details, right to the lines, the risers, every little detail that they've done to bring the weight down and make it actually a very light and compact wing. First of all, just for carrying around, it's a really nice, light, compact package. And you can, also with the nitinol rods, and the general construction of it, you can pack it really, really small. It's very small, tiny, teeny weeny. It's not crazily extreme. I don't think it's crazily extreme in its construction. It's not super fragile, I don't think. For an ultralight wing, it is an ultralight glider. And of course, getting lighter materials, there has to be a payoff. There's a reason why they make gear out of standard weight. About the ground handling, well, I have to say generally, and I have managed to, I've done forward launches on the CODEX, I've launched it in really top end, going slightly backwards launching conditions, and a whole load of very thermic, wishy-washy variable conditions. I think the ground handling and general pilot demands on the ground are exceptionally good and easy for the class, for a sports class wing. I think they're right at the bottom of the ENC class in terms of pilot demands. It's very low. It's really as easy as quite a few high B wings. And I think the CODEX is very similar like that. The only thing you might say in very strong conditions, if you pull the glider up hard, then it's got a bit more performance and a bit more speed. But I really have to say, you can see it really clearly without ground handling and me purposefully pulling the glider up hard. It is very, very forgiving for the class. Very easy. I think it has, certainly of all the ENC two-liners, and then you can include almost any two-liner in that, I think it has some of the easiest and possibly the easiest ground handling and most forgiving all-round ground handling characteristics of any two-liner I've tested so far. Now launching in strong conditions. Now, I've mentioned in our CODEX review, the CODEX is very easy to manage on the ground and very easy to launch, even in very strong conditions. It is semi-light, you do need to manage it a bit. And I think that's where the VORTEX, being ultralight, having a bit more of a tendency for the material to blow around and come up, requires a bit more management. and is a bit more pilot demands in that way, in those strong, really strong gusty conditions. Without a doubt, even then, relatively speaking, for an ultralight wing, it's very easy to manage. It's quite easy to hold down. I prefer my technique. If you just hold the rear risers, that works well enough. Definitely will mention that when it's really strong and breezy, and if you're on a slope, when you let the risers go, if the glider's got the wind on it, then especially I think a bit more with the Vortex, with its light construction, it's going to want to come up and fly. So you do need to hold it down. The launch characteristics, it comes up, it doesn't have this tendency to hold and drop back. It comes up positively, not hanging back, but progressively. It does not tend to shoot up. It doesn't build up massive energy. So it's not like a glider that kind of shoots up, builds loads of energy, and then it's like, ooh, try and catch it. It's quite easy to manage. Once the glider is above you, it really wants to stay above you. When you're wanting to put it off to the side, we're actually putting it to the side around the wind window works very easily. But if you're wanting to drop it back and kite it up, it kind of wants to go back to that position. I have noticed also, like the CODEX, when there's a thermal in front of you and you're kiting, that sometimes I've found that glider really does want to pull forwards and fly off. And it actually goes forward quite a bit without collapsing. But you do want to hold it back a bit because eventually it will fly forward enough. It's not like a super reflex paramotor or parakite wing, which they've just gone for very heavy reflex because that's be very inefficient for performance. They've got it to have a very good stable profile, but it kind of goes to a point, but then you want to hold it back. Having very sorted ground handling and very easy all-round ground handling is a very important aspect. Yeah, I'm very impressed by it. I really am. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's like a super playful glider. Recently, I've been testing Advanced Sigma 12, more recently as well, the Niviuk Arctic 7P. They're more playful gliders, particularly the Niviuk Arctic 7P. That's a kind of playful, light, and very agile glider. Taking off, well, actually, even launching in some quite tricky conditions, because of the Vortex's tendency to just sit really nicely above you, to be very solid, very efficient, and not move around all over the place. And first mentioned, to have a very good glide and very good efficiency, very easy for taking off, launching and flying. Even on a quite gentle slope, it's just glides off really nicely. So very good. Very similar to me in the feeling to the CODEX, but I don't think it's exactly the same. They both feel very solid, very planted, well behaved, and you've got very much a monoblock kind of feeling. You don't have this kind of two wings moving around feeling, which you tend to get more with higher aspect ratio. With the Vortex, it's a bit softer slightly than the CODEX. There's a little bit more movement and feeling than you have with the CODEX. So there's a little bit more feedback, but it's still a very reassuring, calm, and a bit more on the dampened side kind of wing. It's really well behaved, but it definitely is giving you a bit more feedback and feeling and moves around a bit more in those really sporty active conditions. And then in terms of feedback, so now when we're flying around and I'm trying to feel where the lift is in a bit more subtle conditions. Yeah, I found the Vortex giving a really good level of feedback. I was able to find the thermals. I had a group of very good pilots around me, mostly flying at least a couple of photons, and then there was somebody on an Enzo 3, and then of course Liam that's on his zeolite. I had the glider I was flying was the lowest performance glider, the safest of all those wings, but I have to say at no point did I feel disadvantaged on the Vortex in terms of climb rate and finding climbs. I'm going to say very clearly, I think the Vortex is very good for finding lift, and it's not the most feedbacky. So something like the Niviuk Arctic 7 or the Advanced Sigma 12, they give a nicer feeling and feedback. But from my experience so far, all of the best three liners do. BG Lynx, the BGD Lynx 2, I'll include in that 2.5 liner. They just have that bit more feeling to them. But for a 2-liner, I think that the Vortex gives a really good level of feedback, and I was able to keep finding the best bit of lift around. Now we move on to climbing. Well, got to say the Vortex, like the CODEX, but possibly even better, it climbs really very well. It's got a really strong point in climbing. It's very, very efficient at climbing, even in weak small thermals, but bigger thermals, strong thermals, all thermals. I think it's a very strong, very good climber. Very efficient for soaring around on the hill, and just if you're just soaring in ridge lift with a bit of mix of thermal or even just coastal soaring, I think you're going to find yourself doing very well relatively to everyone else. It's got a very good sink rate and climb rate. So now we get onto the handling side of things with VORTEX. I think like the CODEX, it's got a very flat and steady turn. It's not a very agile, nimble glider. It's made to be very efficient, very solid, very reassuring and calm and well behaved, but it's not a very nimble, agile glider. The brake travel is very similar to the Delta 5, i.e. it's a little bit on the shorter side. It's not long, nowhere near as long as, say, gliders like the Photon, the Light, the Volt 4 and 5, others like that. It's not really short, but it's not long. So that's good. You've got a good early contact point. But you still, when you want to turn the glider, you do want to get it and turn it tight. It's good to then take a wrap. Take a half wrap like that. That's the best brake position I found for tight turning. And it's got that tendency to turn very flat. And if you're flying and you only use a little bit of brake, you're going to feel like, oh my, this glider turns very wide. Not quite as wide and slow as, say, the Photon and Light, but heading in that direction. I think it's a tendency like that is a bit less agile than the Delta 5. With the VORTEX, it's got that tendency to turn flat. What you find is it wants you to be boss. It wants you to be quite assertive on the brakes, and it tolerates it. Maybe even more so with the VORTEX, because we'll get onto the stall point. It's very forgiving on the stall point, exceptionally forgiving for the class. Brake pressure is moderate, and as you go down, it's definitely not light, but it's not heavy either. I think the Delta 5 and I think also the Photon and Light, their brake pressure is higher and firmer and a bit stiffer feeling. So with the CODEX and the VORTEX, the feeling is the brake is firm, moderate to firm, but it's kind of a little bit less stiff. It's a little bit more, little bit softer. But then as you go down on the brakes with the VORTEX, the brake pressure builds up, and it's very, very obvious when you're getting near the stall point. It's also very forgiving. There's it doesn't just kind of stall. It's kind of, as you slow down, you'll get to that stall point and you can feel it quite clearly. The brake pressure's built up. The glider feels still very solid. And then you can feel it start to go. You can really very obviously feel the glider's on its stall, and you can now ease up on the brake, and the glider won't kind of dive off or something like that. It just kind of come back up to fly. Very forgiving. So here's the thing. So it's a two-liner, but it's actually more forgiving to fly than some three-liners or even 2.5 liners. I think they've made a fantastic job at making a wing that performs and flies very well, very easy to manage and fly. It's a two-liner, but actually the pilot demands are at the low end of the sports class. Well, I must say, from all the testing I've done flying with other gliders, the performance of the VORTEX seems very, very good. At least as good as the CODEX. It's very impressive. It's definitely, from my testing, the performance is better than the Bonanza 3 and the Volt 4, which also have higher pilot demands. I do think the VORTEX offers a very impressive package of very, very good performance. The glide is very, very impressive. And when I'm flying around at trim with others, it has very good performance on bar. So the speed system is very light. I think it's lighter than it is with the CODEX, which I think wasn't heavy, but it's very light, very usable. And the glider seems to pick up very good speed. I'd say it's like 14 to 15, maybe 16 kilometers an hour over trim. So not quite as fast as the fastest high-end EN C-2 liners, but very, very good. And it feels very solid and very performant, and the speed is very usable. Fully accelerated, it's really not far off the best performing high-end EN C-2 liners. They do have an edge, but it's not that far off. One difference with the Delta 5 is when it's fully accelerated, it's got an edge on being very solid. But then again, it has a bit less feeling, but it's very solid like that. And obviously they've designed it to be like that. The glider feels like it sort of tightens up a bit. And I'd say that VORTEX is still very solid, but not quite as solid as the Delta 5 tank. Also, I think it's slightly less solid than the CODEX. Still, relatively speaking, let's put this into perspective here. They're some of the most collapse resistant solid wings around. The rear risers, flying on the rear risers, accelerated. The pressure on them, I think, is moderate. It's not light. It's not really light, and it's not heavy. It's definitely moderate to firm. I felt like I had a good connection with the wing. Yeah, good feeling, and certainly was able to fly in some, using the bar today in some quite choppy conditions, was able to carry on putting on, mostly flew with like half to 2/3 bar and using the rear risers, but I also did put the bar onto full, and then I found that, as usual, when you do that, the rear risers get lighter and more usable, and I was able to fly quite actively with them, so they work very well. Perhaps the Delta 5 may have a slight edge in terms of that rear riser control. Just quick mention, it's something I'm pretty sure that Nova started. It's the height adjustable rear handles. So I think if I remember, you take off the ends there and go inside, and it's a Allen key or something like that. I have to mention they're a little bit fiddly to change, so that's not super easy. Could be easier, but it works. And you can see all the the little different blue marks there. And you can adjust them for people with different length arms. We've got up, we thermaled high, we got up to base. Now, descent techniques. With a VORTEX like the CODEX, you can do both. Classic big ears using the outer A lines, and it's got lines that are very, very clearly that stand out. They're very easy to reach and do that. You can also do the tip stalls, classic big ears with the A lines. Well, very easy to identify, easy to reach, and actually, I mean, they are firm, but not that hard to pull in. Not as hard as, say, the Delta 5, nowhere near as heavy pressure as that. Or the Photon, again, similar. Firm, but very, very manageable and good to pull in. They come in a good size, and also they're pretty stable and very effective. So really good. To clear them, I found that I generally keep my bar on. Releasing them, they tended to stay in, and you can either pump them in. It always works a bit better to pump like that, but generally I find it better to just pump them both together. Again, obviously you don't overdo it, but I didn't find there was a real tendency to stall the glider like that. Some might be worried about pumping both, but if you pump one out and then the other, it's okay, but it tends to sort of move you off one way and can start wobbling, making you wobble around. By keeping a course and giving a good firm pump out symmetrically, keeps you on course. Tip stalls using the outer B lines, might be labeled C lines on the diagram, but using those, then easy to reach up, and you just reach up nice and high on them. The pressure is firm, but I'd say for tip stalls, not so heavy, and they come in really well, very effective, good sized tip stalls, not little teeny tip stalls like you have on the Photon, the Light, and the Delta 5. They're really small and not very effective. So much more effective than that, and very stable, work really well. And when you release them, they pop back out. Spiral dives, well, it's nothing to report particularly. It's very easy. I mean, the glider is as I mentioned, is quite it turns quite flat. So to get it to go into a spiral, it's not like a glider that hooks into a spiral. You weight shift, you pull it round, it builds round. There's no difficulty getting into the spiral. It's easy to access, easy to control, not excessively high Gs or anything like that. And then coming out and controlling the speed was very, very easy, particularly easy, I'd say. So, and then when you come out of it, its tendency to be pitch stable and not really pitch and dive about makes it a relatively easy, forgiving wing. Okay, so now let's talk on to a bit of the fun side, but also it relates to agility with wing overs. With a VORTEX, it's not really a descent technique with wing overs. I mean, you do lose height a lot, so it is a way to get down, but it's not really the best way to get down. Actually, with a VORTEX like the CODEX, I found you can actually do surprisingly good wing overs. I say surprisingly because it's not like a super agile wing, and it's more on the flat turning side, but actually because the wing is very, very solid, and if you are assertive on the brakes, then you can get the glider to really build up some nice wing overs. It's not a really wangy kind of glider. That I don't think that's its real strength or character. That's not what it's at. But it's certainly, if you like a bit of that stuff, you can still do that, of course. So let's talk about build quality. Well, I think the build quality, looking all around the wing, the risers, the lines, everything, the build quality is really, really excellent. All the details are very nicely made. Risers are very nice to handle. Of course, it's an ultralight wing, so you need to treat it with more care. But actually, I think in terms of if you treat it right, it should really last you a really good long time. Who's it for? So, well, the VORTEX is certainly, I'd say, the most perfect pilot target group for it is pilots who are moving from a high B glider, wanting to get into the sports class, or perhaps they're flying a lower C glider, but moving into the sports class and they want their first two-liner. They're wanting to try and get into flying two-liners, but they also want something that's light and compact. They don't want something that's so heavy, and they don't want to go to the high end of the sports class. I think also almost equally, really, pilots who are already flying sports class wings, maybe are flying 3-liners or 2.5-liners, same thing again, but now they want to get to their first two-liner, but they're also again looking for something that's light and compact. Then the VORTEX is perfect for them. I think another group of pilots that are going to find the VORTEX really ideal is pilots who've gone to the high C class and got themselves a high C glider, because that's all there was before. They wanted to fly a two-liner. I think it's very similar to how pilots, if they wanted to fly a two-liner, used to have to get a D-wing. A lot of those pilots have moved down to the high-end sports, high-end C gliders, because they're still like, I'm a two-liner pilot, but now they've got a safer and easier to manage glider. I think quite a few of the pilots who have, maybe they've upgraded from a high B or changed from a C, I don't know, but they've gone to the high C two-liners or just flying a high C wing, even a 3-liner, and now they've decided, well, do you know what, that's a bit much for me. I don't really need those pilot demands, but I still want to keep more performance. I want to get the best performance I can without having a high hot C glider, but I don't want to go back to having a B glider or that. Then I think that's another target group of pilots that are going to really be very happy with the VORTEX. Rightio, well, that's it for me for this review of the Nova VORTEX. I hope you found it interesting and useful. Click the like button, stick a comment below. I also want to say a really, really huge thanks to all of you that support us in one way or another. Thank you very much. That's all. I'm going to go now. Bye.